Have you ever seen someone lose their job simply for doing the right thing? Elias Carter was a quiet, steady, and humble waiter, never one to compete for attention. All he did was pour a glass of water for a customer that the entire restaurant had ignored. For that, he was called into the back office, scolded for being too soft for this job, and fired the very next day. But what Elias didn't know was this: the woman he served that night wasn't just any customer. She was the owner of the entire restaurant chain, disguised to observe her own system from the inside. And Elias, the man who was fired for his kindness, was handed ownership of the restaurant the very next morning. This is a story about quiet strength, about how a person doesn't need to shout to make a system listen. If you've ever been looked down on for choosing kindness, this story is for you. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. The bell on the glass door jingled, just like every morning at the Marigold Café, a place where brunch blended with classic jazz and the rhythmic clanging of the kitchen. The scent of freshly baked waffles mixed with the aroma of Ethiopian coffee drifted through the air, making even the customers on the patio look up and smile. Inside, servers weaved between tables, fast-paced, loud, full of motion. But amid the bustle, there was one person who moved without rush, yet still got everything done: Elias Carter. At 24, Elias was the kind of employee customers remembered, but co-workers overlooked. He didn't crack crude jokes, didn't sneak cigarettes after shifts, and didn't join in the snide gossip at the barista station. Instead, he showed up on time, pressed his uniform every day, and even wiped the undersides of tables, though no one ever asked him to. Elias worked as if tending to a quiet bookshop, an odd fit in a cafe filled with unspoken rules and a culture of selective service. "Yo, Carter, too slow," barked Nolan, a seasoned server, tilting his head toward Elias, who was calmly carrying a tray with 3 brunch plates, walking as if balancing the weight of the world. Elias didn't answer. He just gave a slight nod, avoided any collisions, and made his way to table 4, where an elderly couple was waiting. He set down the tray, bent slightly, not too much, and smiled gently. "Thanks for your patience. Eggs Benedict for you, sir, and strawberry butter pancakes for you, ma'am. If you need more syrup, just wave. I'll be nearby." The man nodded. The woman beamed. "You're the first one this week who got our order right without asking again." Elias gave a modest nod and stepped away, not expecting praise, not swelling with pride. To him, it was just the job, and a job should be done with respect. But not everyone saw it that way. Behind the bar, Victor Reese, the morning shift manager, a man in his 40s with scrutinizing eyes and a belly hanging over his belt, watched Elias like an unnecessary piece in his vision of efficiency. "That guy always walks around like he's serving royalty. Should have learned to work fast, not work right," Victor muttered to Kyle, a young bartender stirring a smoothie with one hand and scrolling his phone with the other. Kyle laughed. "Elias is that kind of too nice for his own good guy. A soft dude like that won't survive long in this business." Neither of them realized that Elias's silence, his refusal to clap back, his indifference to snide remarks, was actually a quiet wall, shielding dignity in a place that increasingly treated customers like walking wallets. In Elias's mind that morning, there was no room for pettiness, only numbers. This month's rent, mom's medication, his sister's college entrance tuition, every tipped dollar, every extra shift, each one a link in the chain keeping his family from falling. He didn't have time for anger. He didn't have the privilege to complain. He had only one thing, himself, and a kindness that had never been broken. And that morning, when the cafe's front door opened once more, Elias, as usual, didn't look up, wasn't surprised. But the person who walked in this time wouldn't be like anyone else. The gentle chime of the glass door echoed through the Marigold Café, but no one inside bothered to look up. A middle-aged woman with dark hair, dressed simply in a knit cardigan and flat shoes, stepped inside. No makeup, no designer bag, no visible signs of spending power. She stood near the entrance, eyes scanning for a place to sit, or at the very least, someone to ask. But everyone turned away. Behind the counter stood Victor Reese, the morning shift manager. He spotted her, smirked, then leaned over to whisper to Kyle, the bartender. People like this have too much free time, dressed like she's out for a walk and waltzing into a brunch spot where everything's $20. Kyle sneered, not bothering to lower his voice. Probably just here for free water. Her face looks drier than burnt toast. At the order station, Nolan, a young waiter, glanced at her, then turned to Jace, a fellow server behind him, and said with a chuckle, "Folks like that come in, order one iced tea and hog a table for hours. Poor and annoying, bad combo." Evelyn stood there for nearly 2 full minutes, without a single staff member approaching her. Customers who came in after her were greeted, seated. But she remained invisible, as though she wasn't even there. Only Elias, who had been wiping down table 5 nearby, noticed the loneliness in her eyes. He set down his cloth and walked toward the entrance, calm but purposeful, as if he knew he was doing the right thing, even if it would draw unwanted attention. "Good morning, Ma'am. I'm Elias. Thank you for visiting Marigold today. May I help you find a seat?" She blinked, surprised, not at the greeting itself, but at the fact that someone was finally treating her like a real guest. "Somewhere with good light would be nice," she replied gently, though there was something like a bruise behind her voice. Elias led her to a table by the window, a spot most avoided due to the harsh, direct sunlight. But she smiled, sat down, and nodded her thanks as if she had finally been seen after a long, invisible journey. He brought over a menu, poured a glass of ice water, then asked, "Would you like some napkins? Or maybe a cup of hot tea while you look over the menu?" From behind the counter, Victor raised an eyebrow and sneered, "Look at that! More polite than greeting the governor." Kyle shook his head. That kind of pandering to broke customers just wastes time. Elias was born for charity, not service. Elias didn't hear them, but Evelyn did. She didn't turn her head, didn't respond. She simply tightened her grip around the glass of water. The confusion in her eyes had faded. Now, there was memory. When Elias returned, she asked softly, "Have you been working here long?" "A little over a year, Ma'am." "Long enough to notice who gets ignored and who gets the special treatment. Do you often serve people like me?" Evelyn looked him straight in the eyes. Elias paused briefly, then answered with quiet conviction, "I serve everyone the same, because everyone deserves to be seen." Evelyn nodded, her eyes quiet for a moment. "Then, today, you're the first person who's seen me." As Elias turned to walk away, she murmured to herself, softly enough that he wouldn't hear it, but loud enough that the world eventually would. "The world has forgotten kindness, but I haven't." The clink of spoons hitting ice glasses echoed behind the bar. It felt like just another ordinary workday. But for Elias Carter, that simple moment, smiling at the woman no one else noticed, had made his chest feel just a little lighter, as if he had done something right in a place where everything felt wrong. But before he could even dry his hands after the shift, a cold voice snapped from behind. "You, manager's office, now!" Victor Reese, the shift manager, didn't need to raise his voice. His tone was already sharp and icy enough to cut. Elias froze, blinked a few times, then nodded quietly and obeyed. The small office behind the bar was a place most employees dreaded. That room wasn't for coaching. It was where closed-door trials took place, often ending in vague threats or irreversible decisions. Victor shut the door behind them, not with a slam, not harshly, but gently. And somehow that made it feel heavier, like a verdict. He didn't offer Elias a seat. He simply crossed his arms, leaned against the file cabinet, and stared hard at the young man in the now faded white apron. "What exactly do you think you're doing out there, Carter?" Elias stood straight, saying nothing. Victor's voice dropped into a bitter grind. "I'm talking about your little VIP routine. You think every customer deserves to be treated like royalty. This is a brunch cafe in the middle of Atlanta, not a damn soup kitchen for retired grandmas." Elias took a slow breath. He wasn't surprised, but still he tried to keep his voice steady. "I just served her like I would anyone else, because no one else did." Victor scoffed, a harsh, mocking laugh. "You still don't get how this industry works, do you? We don't serve people equally. We serve spending, tips, and first impressions." And that lady looked like a lost retired schoolteacher. "What were you hoping for? $20 in tips?" Elias said nothing, but his eyes stayed locked on Victor's, not defiant, not submissive, just unwavering. Victor's voice dropped lower, each word sharp as a pin. "You're not cut out for this line of work, Elias. You're too soft, too nice. This business doesn't work for people like you. And if I were a customer, I wouldn't trust you. A server who looks at everyone like they're angels. That's the kind who kills the appetite." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Elias stood still, hands clasped in front. No protest, no defense. He'd heard words like these before, but today, they cut deeper. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice as if dispensing some kind of honest advice. "This job takes grit, takes edge. You don't have it. If I were you, I'd quit before someone throws you out." Elias bowed his head slightly. "I understand." He turned to leave, hands trembling just a bit. But in his eyes, there was something Victor couldn't see. A fire, quietly starting to burn. The next morning, Atlanta's sky was a dull gray. Light drizzle rolled down the windshield like weary whispers. Elias Carter arrived at the Marigold Café earlier than usual. Apron in hand, he stepped inside with the quiet hope of starting his shift peacefully. No arguments, no revisiting the past. But the bar was empty. No orders being called, no coffee brewing. Only Victor Reese stood in the center of the dining area, arms crossed, eyes cold and unblinking. Next to him were Nolan Briggs and Kyle Mason, both smirking as if they were about to enjoy a private performance. "Elias Carter," Victor called out, loud enough for the back kitchen staff to hear. "You don't need to change into your uniform." Elias paused. His hand still held the apron. Victor stepped forward and tossed a hastily printed A4 sheet on the table, along with a thin envelope. "This is your infraction report. The customer from yesterday filed a complaint stating you harassed them by asking too many questions and made them feel uncomfortable. Under Clause 5.2, Behavior Impacting Guest Experience, you are hereby terminated, effective immediately." Elias looked at the paper. No customer signature. No proof. Just a fabricated report, a trap carefully laid. "I didn't do anything wrong," Elias said softly. She didn't seem upset. On the contrary, she thanked me. Nolan laughed. "Next time, get her to sign off on it, Mr. Polite." Kyle whistled lightly, as if seeing someone off. Victor kept his serious expression, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Too bad stubbornness is also grounds for termination. "You were warned, Elias. This cafe needs speed, efficiency, and prioritization. Not some dreamer who thinks he's here to serve everyone equally." Elias clenched the edge of the paper, but he didn't cry, he didn't shout. There was only a strange stillness wrapping around him, as if he'd just stepped out of a long dream, and realized he had never truly been seen as a person in this place. He removed his apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. No one thanked him, no one tried to stop him. On his way out, Elias's eyes passed by the customer counter. The seat where the woman had sat the day before. The table had been cleared, but the faint ring from her water glass still remained. A trace of something that had truly happened. He walked toward the door. The rain was falling harder now. Behind him, Nolan muttered, "Too soft for this job. Should have gone into charity, kid." Elias didn't turn back, but in his footsteps there was a silence heavy as steel, and no one in that cafe, not a single soul, knew that the man they had just thrown out the side door was the very one who would soon return through the front. Elias Carter's studio apartment was pitch dark, lit only by the dull glow from the old microwave in the kitchen. He sat at the table, arm resting on an unfinished stack of job applications. Dinner had gone cold, and rain tapped steadily against the window pane. Elias had once believed, if you do the right thing, at the very least, you won't get hurt. But the truth? It was his kindness that got him fired, discarded like something useless. His phone buzzed. He slowly glanced at the screen. Unknown number, no name. A second of hesitation. Then he answered. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, low, calm, but sharp like a cold morning wind. "Is this Elias Carter?" He froze. The voice wasn't familiar, but it carried the tone of someone who had walked through many rooms of power. "Yes, this is he. This is Evelyn Hale. You may not remember me, but I remember you." Elias straightened up. His mind spun through flashes of the previous day. "You're the woman in the grey coat at the window table. The one only you bothered to bring water to." Elias's heart skipped a beat. Evelyn's tone didn't change. It remained composed, but now turned firm. "I'm not just another customer, Elias. I'm the founder of Hale & Sons Hospitality Group, and I've been observing the Marigold Café from a distance for over a year." Elias went still. The memory sharpened. How she had entered quietly, with that steady gaze, the worn coat, and how everyone had looked away like she didn't exist. "I want to meet you, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Café Windermere, North Side and 11th. I won't call again." A pause. "Because I believe in if you have the courage to be kind when no one's watching, maybe you have the courage to lead when everyone is." The call ended. No extra explanation, no sweet promises. Just Elias sitting there, his breath short, hand gripping the phone like he'd just touched fire. It was still raining, but in his chest something had ignited. Today he'd been thrown out the back door like a leftover. Tomorrow, would he walk back through the front, not as a job seeker, but as the one being chosen? The next morning, Café Windermere glowed under a soft golden light filtering through its tall glass windows. The classic cafe had black and white tiled floors, warm yellow lights, and the subtle aroma of baked pastries and espresso lingering in the air. Elias Carter arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a crisp white shirt, hair neatly combed, eyes still weary, but awake with a new kind of clarity. He had no idea what kind of conversation he was about to walk into, but one truth pulsed steadily in his chest. Kindness is not a mistake, and if someone had noticed it, he was ready to listen. The door opened. Evelyn Hale stepped in. No grey coat today. She wore a deep navy velvet blazer, low-heeled shoes, her silver hair tied neatly at the back of her neck. Her face bore no makeup, but her eyes, sharp as blades, seemed to cut through everything they saw. She sat down, wasting no time, placed a brown leather folder on the table, and gently slid it toward Elias. These are the ownership documents for the entire Marigold Café property. Elias blinked, hard. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Evelyn sipped her coffee, voice calm and precise. I built the Marigold brand from a small neighborhood eatery into a model brunch franchise. But 5 years ago, I stepped back, became a silent shareholder. I left operations to a team of modern managers. All they've done is polish the brand, while letting it rot from the inside. Elias said nothing. His heartbeat had begun to race. I returned in disguise, as just another customer, and I saw it with my own eyes. Staff who were allowed to ignore someone like me. Just because I wasn't wearing designer clothes, fancy shoes, or checking in on Instagram. Her gaze hardened. You were the only one who didn't ask who I was. You weren't looking for a tip. You poured water for me like I was a human being. Silence. A heavy pause. Then Evelyn pushed the folder closer, right to the edge of the table. I'm not planning to sell the cafe, I'm planning to hand it over. Not to someone with experience, but to someone with character. If you accept, I'll sign it today. No payment. Elias was speechless. I've never run anything before. I don't have capital, no degree. I know, Evelyn interrupted. I was once like you. They told me I was too kind to survive in this industry. I proved them wrong. Now it's your turn. Elias looked down at the folder. The transfer contract was fully prepared. All rights to operations, branding, and assets would belong to Elias Carter, effective upon signing. His heart stood at an impossible crossroads, the fear of someone who had been dismissed, and the chance to never again bow his head for being kind. He drew in a breath, then looked up. Why me? Evelyn smiled. Because I believe the best servers are the ones who've been served the worst, and know exactly how much that pain costs. Elias Carter sat alone in Piedmont Park, the brown leather folder resting on his lap like a strange wind that had blown into his life without warning. The words in the contract echoed in his mind, not because of the allure of ownership, but because of the inner crisis of someone who had never been trusted like this before. He had grown up in a working-class family. His mother passed away early. His father worked 12-hour night shifts at a gas station. Elias had never gone to college, had never stood before a crowd large enough to speak his mind. All he knew was hard work, respectfulness, and kindness. But this world doesn't reward kindness. They called him the soft one. The kind of guy who'll get drained dry in any workplace. So gentle, he won't even protect himself. And now, after being fired precisely for that gentleness, someone was handing him an entire business. Elias clutched the folder tighter. His heart pounded. In his mind, Victor's voice echoed, "You think everyone deserves equal service? Then you're gonna starve in this business." And then, rising against it, Evelyn's voice replaying like a tide flowing in reverse, "I don't need someone with an MBA. I need someone who's kind. At the moment it matters most." Two worlds. On one side, the contempt he had swallowed his whole life. On the other, an unexpected belief placed in him. Not demanding that he be strong, only that he be brave. His hands trembled, not from fear, but because he now stood before a line he had never dared to cross. The belief that he might lead, rather than only serve. He looked down at the contract, pen in hand. The sun tilted past his shoulder, casting his shadow across the page, and he signed, each stroke of his name imperfect, but steady. Not because he was ready, but because right now no one else needed to do this more than he did. 8 a.m. The Marigold Café buzzed with its usual noise. The clatter of silverware, the hum of the espresso machine, and Victor's booming voice from the prep kitchen. "Nolan, table 12 is late." "Kyle, don't let the customers sit there like statues waiting on water." Everyone was busy. No one noticed the front door opening. Elias Carter walked in. No apron, no serving tray, no bowed head, just a crisply pressed white shirt, a charcoal grey blazer, and freshly trimmed hair. The morning light behind him cast a glow that wrapped around his silhouette, giving his posture a presence that felt unfamiliar. Not boastful, not dramatic, but enough to make heads begin to turn. Victor, just about to snap at Kyle again, stopped cold when he saw Elias. He squinted, smirked, and scoffed. "Well, well, the old waiter's back. What, forget to sign something?" Elias didn't respond. He walked straight to the bar counter, placing a thick folder on the marble surface. His voice wasn't loud, but each word rang clear. "I'm not here to ask for my job back. I'm here to assume ownership of this cafe." The entire cafe went still, as if someone had hit the mute button. Victor burst into laughter, loud, crude, dismissive. "What? You? The owner? Who's supposed to believe that joke?" Just then, the door opened again. Evelyn Hale walked in. She no longer looked like the modest woman from days before. Today she wore a dark navy suit with a silk scarf around her neck. Her gaze was no longer gentle, it radiated authority. She stepped beside Elias, placed her hand on the folder and declared calmly, "I am the founder of Hale & Sons Hospitality Group, and I am the former owner of the Marigold Café. I have transferred full ownership to Elias Carter, effective today." Victor's face went stiff, frozen like stone. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Evelyn glanced at him, a single look sharp enough to make a man who had once managed hundreds feel like a child caught stealing. "And you, Victor," she continued, her voice colder than any air conditioner. "Your favoritism, abuse of power, and public humiliation of staff have all been documented. You are removed from the management system and permanently blacklisted from our entire restaurant network." Victor took a step back. "That's not possible. I've worked here for 7 years. For the first time, Elias stepped forward toward him, looking him in the eye, no anger, no fear. 7 years in charge, and you never understood that power is meant to protect, not to trample. The cafe was dead silent. Victor clenched his jaw, ready to throw down his apron like some last jab. But instead, he lowered his head, growled under his breath, and walked out, leaving behind a space that fit exactly where Elias now stood. Elias turned around, surveying the cafe. The very place where he had once been, made to shrink himself. Today he returned, not with shouting, not with revenge, because his calm was the silent blow. That made the whole system fall quiet. Victor Granger stood frozen by the door Evelyn had just closed behind her. A wave of emptiness and seething, shapeless rage rose up in his throat like acid. Everything he once believed was solid, his power, his title, the fake respect of his staff, had just crumbled like a sandcastle, all because of someone he used to mock as that soft-spoken waiter. He spun around and glared at Elias, now standing silently at the bar, the very spot where Victor had once berated him in front of customers for pouring with the wrong hand. "You all buying into this nonsense?" Victor barked at Nolan, Kyle, and a few other employees standing stiff as statues. "That kid doesn't know the first damn thing about running a cafe. He couldn't even look me in the eye when I passed him." No one answered. Nolan looked down. Kyle swallowed hard. Even those who had once scorned Elias could feel something had shifted in the air. They knew Victor was no longer the one leading the room. Victor gave a hollow laugh, clinging to the last threads of his crumbling authority. "You watch. This place will crash in 3 days without me. He doesn't know how to rotate shifts, manage inventory, or negotiate supplier contracts. He's gonna drown." Elias finally looked up. His gaze was calm but unwavering. His voice was soft but firm. "You're right. I've never run a cafe before. But I do know this. A true leader doesn't need to shout to be heard, doesn't need threats to keep order, and doesn't need to step on others just to feel taller." Victor's face drained of color. Elias stepped forward and opened the folder Evelyn had handed him earlier. He pulled out a sheet of paper and held it up. "And I also know this. You altered inventory records to cover up withheld tips from new staff. You falsified purchase orders with a former vendor to collect hidden commissions. And you fired people simply for treating customers with more respect than you deemed appropriate." The cafe erupted. Someone gasped. Another covered their mouth. Evelyn had left behind all the evidence. And Elias hadn't kept it to take revenge, but to stop the system from repeating its mistakes. Victor stood stunned, like he'd just been punched in the face by the truth. "I'll sue," he stammered, but his voice was shaking now. Elias gave a slight nod. "You can. But the documents have already been forwarded to the company's legal team, and I'm not here to argue. I'm here to rebuild." Victor stood like his spine had been snapped. A second later, he threw his apron onto the floor and walked out. No applause, no send-off. Only the silence of an era ending. And through it all, Elias Carter remained standing. Quiet, but no longer the timid young man this cafe once tossed out the door. 2 days after the power shift that saw Victor removed from the Marigold Café, it seemed like things might start moving in a new direction. But change is never easy, especially when remnants of the old regime are still standing inside the kitchen. Nolan, once Victor's right hand, had now gone silent in a way that felt like a challenge. He wasn't openly rebellious, but in the kitchen everything slowed. He cooked dishes out of order, responded to customers curtly, and made guests ask 3 times before finally bringing out their meals. Kyle was more discreet, but frequently disappeared into the stockroom during shifts. The cameras didn't cover every angle, but Elias had noticed. On days Kyle was on duty, the cash drawer always came up a few dollars short, and odd receipts began showing up. One Wednesday, while reorganizing the spice shelf, Jordan, a young, serious new employee, stepped into Elias's office, holding a stack of order slips. Mr. Elias, I'm not sure if I should say this, but yesterday Nolan told me, don't stress over late orders. Everyone here has their own way of surviving. Jordan hesitated, then added, and Kyle, I saw him stuffing something into his pocket before clocking out. Elias listened without reacting. He didn't slam his desk. He didn't call a sudden meeting. Instead, he nodded, opened his laptop, and began quietly reviewing shift logs, receipts, and internal camera footage. He downloaded all data from the past 3 days, put in his earbuds, and started watching each clip. Late at night, after the cafe had closed, Elias remained at the bar, alone, lit only by the dim glow of overhead lights. Every time he found a discrepancy, he marked it in red ink in his notebook. People had once said he was too soft, but it was that very softness that now allowed him to reshape a bent system. The next morning, as staff arrived for their shifts, Elias had already printed 3 detailed reports. No yelling, no dramatic tone. He simply called Nolan and Kyle into the office, laid before them dates, times, actions, violations, and short video clips clearly showing the behaviors in question. Nolan stared at the papers, sweat forming on his brow. I don't know what you're trying to do, he muttered with a forced laugh. Elias answered, I'm not trying to change the past. I just want to know, do you want to keep tearing this place down? Or do you want a chance to build it right? Kyle remained silent, eyes lowered, but Elias noticed his hand clenched tightly. Something in that question seemed to land. Elias didn't fire them. Instead, he gave them 3 days of paid leave, with one condition. If they returned, they would have to accept the new rules. Fairness, transparency, no lies. No one is forcing you to stay, but if you choose to stay, there will be no more shadows to hide behind. With that, Elias opened the office door. Nolan walked out without a word. Kyle paused, gave a slight nod, then left as well. Elias exhaled. The storm hadn't passed yet. But he knew he had just redrawn the line between the old era and the new one. 3 days later, Kyle returned to work. He didn't say much, just quietly entered the kitchen, put on his apron, and started prepping ingredients as if nothing had happened. Nolan, however, didn't come back. He sent a short email stating that he couldn't continue working in such a hypocritical environment. Elias read it, nodded slightly, then forwarded the file to Evelyn's legal department for a full investigation into payroll and bonus discrepancies during Victor's tenure. Everything seemed to be calming down until the next ripple came. From the register. One weekend afternoon, Jordan, the only young employee who had respected Elias from the start, brought over a stack of strange receipts. Mr. Elias, these receipts were split for no reason. I checked again and the cash totals don't match the system records. Something's off. Elias frowned. He immediately pulled up the POS system logs, reviewing each transaction line by line. And then he saw it. A new user account recently created, username G.Mason. But in the employee directory, no one by that name existed. He opened the activity log. The account had logged in at 9 a.m., right when Elias was out meeting with a supplier, and made 6 invoice adjustments in under 30 minutes. Elias extracted the camera footage. In one blurry but clearly identifiable frame, he saw Kyle standing at the POS terminal, glancing around nervously, then entering a password. There was no doubt anymore. Elias's kindness had been seen as a vulnerability, and someone had chosen to test it. Again. That night, Elias didn't call a staff meeting. He called just one person, Evelyn Hale. The call was brief, but enough to turn Evelyn's voice cold as steel. I gave you this cafe because I saw the strength in your kindness. But if someone thinks kindness is stupidity, then it's time to remind them. Compassion has boundaries. The next morning, Elias walked into the office and placed on the desk a detailed report of all 6 fraudulent transactions, time-stamped camera stills, and login access records. Then he called Kyle in. "I'm not going to ask why," Elias said bluntly. "I'm only asking, is there anything you want to say before I forward this to corporate audit?" Kyle froze. There were no more excuses, no more exits. He tried to maintain composure, but his hands had already begun to shake. "I needed the money. I thought no one would notice. Elias cut him off. "You don't need to explain. You just need to leave. And if I hear of any further action tied to this brand, whether it's slander, rumors, or sabotage, I will take it all the way." Kyle lowered his head, silently removed his apron, and walked out. No one saw him off. No one spoke in his defense. Because this time, no one believed Elias was weak. He had shown them. Kindness does not mean you're easy to break. And anyone who chooses to stab it in the back will pay the price. Monday morning, the kitchen at Marigold Café opened right on time, as always. But the air felt different. On the notice board near the bar, a bold line of text: "Mandatory all-staff meeting, 9:30 a.m., no exceptions." Elias Carter stood inside the cafe's small meeting room, holding a pointer, his eyes focused. Jordan was the first to enter. Then came the line cooks, cashiers, bussers, and eventually every seat was filled. No one spoke. No one dared show attitude, because everyone knew after the turbulence of the past few days, something big was about to happen. Elias stepped to the front. No blazer, no crisp dress shirt, just a dark sweater and the calm face everyone had come to expect. But this time, there was something different in his gaze. A certainty that couldn't be dismissed. He didn't start with pleasantries. He pressed a button on the remote. The screen behind him lit up, playing a short video. Kyle caught on camera, secretly logging into the POS system, eyes darting, hands shaking as he adjusted invoices. Next appeared a chart: dates, times, cash discrepancies, and the fake username G.Mason. The room fell silent. People exchanged glances. Jordan swallowed hard. Elias turned back around, looking at each person in the room. Then he spoke, not loudly, but each word landed with weight. "I was once fired for serving a customer no one else thought mattered. I was once told I was too soft for this industry. I came back, not for revenge, but to fix what once made me stay silent." He paused. Every eye was now on him, not with doubt, but with attention. Kyle is gone. Nolan refused to change. And Victor, the one who manipulated this place, is now permanently banned from every Evelyn Hale property. Elias stepped forward. He was no longer the timid server bowing behind the coffee counter. "I don't need anyone to bow to me, but if you choose to stay, you will stand tall, because kindness is no longer optional. It's the standard." He raised his hand and clicked again. A new slide appeared, a full operational reform plan, new team roles, core values, training schedule. All clearly written, detailed, precise. Starting today, Marigold Café is no longer a place for power games or those who excel at kissing up and kicking down. From today on, this is a place where everyone, from the dishwasher to the oldest guest, is treated with the same respect. He didn't wait for applause. He didn't expect anyone to rise in agreement. Elias simply gave a small nod, then ended with a single sentence, low and firm. "If you don't agree with that, the door is still open." No one stood, no one walked out, only a few faces slowly lowered and nodded, and among them were the very people who once thought of him as weak. The week following that staff meeting, Marigold Café felt like it had been reborn, not through a new paint job or a fancy menu, but through how it treated people. Elias Carter began the restoration journey by not hiring a replacement manager for Victor. "I'll take final responsibility, but I won't do it alone," he told the team at the next meeting. Instead of implementing a rigid org chart, Elias introduced a model he called the 3 pillars of autonomy. Kitchen team, led by veteran chef Penny. Service team, including waitstaff, coordinated with support from Jordan. Operations, cash register, inventory, scheduling, handled directly by Elias. No one had to bow their head and wait for orders. No one was treated as invisible anymore. But the transformation wasn't just structural. Elias took down all the stern, red-letter rule signs. In their place, he mounted a large wooden board by the kitchen entrance with 3 hand-carved lines. Kindness is a principle. Respect is the default. Speaking up is a duty. Then he did something unprecedented in the cafe's history. He created the quiet table, a special seat by the window marked with a small plaque that read, "For anyone who's ever been turned away, because of how they looked, how they spoke, or because someone decided they weren't worth it." Elias personally served this table every Saturday morning. One time, an elderly deaf man sat there alone. Elias approached and placed in front of him a handwritten menu in large print, along with a small wooden board displaying the alphabet in sign language. The man was so moved he teared up, placed a hand over his heart, and bowed deeply. One day, a young woman walked in asking for a job. "I've been rejected by 5 places because I went through rehab, but I really need a job." Elias looked at her quietly. Then he placed a fresh uniform and a training schedule in front of her. "We don't hire perfect people. We hire people who know how to begin again." Within 3 weeks, Marigold Café was no longer just a brunch spot. It became a place whispered about across the city. That cafe run by the server who once got fired. Evelyn Hale came to visit, but this time not silently. She stood at the entrance, looking at the long line of customers waiting outside, then smiled. "Elias, I didn't hand over a restaurant. I handed over an opportunity. And you turned it into belief." At the bar, Jordan whispered to Penny, "He never raises his voice, huh?" And yet, everyone listens. Penny shrugged, smiling gently, because people don't need to shout when they know they're doing the right thing. Saturday, 7 a.m. The sun hadn't fully risen, but nearly 20 people were already lined up outside Marigold Café, not for a new menu item, but for something else. Something they couldn't name, but could feel. The wooden sign above the door had been replaced Marigold Café, where everyone is served like the most important person. Inside, Elias Carter stood behind the bar, wearing a crisp white shirt and a neatly tied black apron. He straightened a small sign on the counter. "Today, we're not launching a new menu. We're launching a new way of serving." 9 a.m. The doors opened. Guests entered one by one and were immediately struck, not by luxury interiors, not by dazzling lights, but by the atmosphere. Staff wore soft brown uniforms, name tags handwritten, and greeted every guest with a smile. No one was neglected. No one was judged. In the left corner, the quiet table had been decorated with a vase of wildflowers and a small mailbox. Tell us about a time you were silenced. We will read and remember. Elias didn't rush around barking orders like other bosses. He stood behind the espresso machine, hands working, eyes observing, ears listening. Kale 10:30. A black car pulled up in front of the cafe. Out stepped an older woman in a smoky grey coat, oversized glasses, silver hair tied neatly back. Evelyn Hale. No one recognized her except Elias. He stepped out to greet her, bowed slightly, and offered his hand to invite her in. Evelyn didn't choose the VIP table. She chose the quiet table. Elias personally poured her water, placed the menu in front of her, and asked, in the same quiet voice he had used that fateful morning, "What would you like today, ma'am?" Evelyn smiled. Her eyes held something, part pride, part trust. "The same thing you once brought me. Black coffee, plain waffle, and one more thing." Elias tilted his head. "A place in your story, not as the former owner, but as someone who witnessed kindness come back to life." 11 a.m. Local news crews arrived to capture the scene. Residents crowded to take photos, film TikToks. The first posts appeared with hashtags, The Kindness Café. From server to owner, Cafe of the Forgotten. A reporter asked Elias, "What does it feel like to be fired from this place, and now to own it?" Elias smiled, not looking at the camera, just gazing at the coffee cup in his hand. "I didn't come back to own it. I came back to make sure no one else ever walks out that door the way I did." At that very moment, Jordan was serving an elderly woman and her young granddaughter. The little girl looked around and asked, "Is Mr. Elias the owner?" Jordan nodded. He used to be fired from here, but instead of getting angry, he turned it into a home. That afternoon, hundreds of guests came. Not a single one was overlooked. Not a single one was judged for how they looked. And at the center of it all, Elias Carter, quiet, composed, not seeking applause or title, simply stood behind the counter, pouring coffee. 1 week after the reopening, Marigold Café was still packed every morning. But Elias Carter didn't measure success by receipt counts or social media posts. He measured it by the grateful nods of the elderly, by the quiet relief in the eyes of young people hearing their names spoken, for the first time, with care, and by a feeling that this might be the first truly safe place they'd ever sat down in. Monday morning, a fine mist fell across the street. An older man, wearing a worn-out shirt and holding a paper bag, stood hesitantly outside the cafe. His shoes were soaked, his wrinkled face filled with doubt. A passing customer muttered, "Probably here to beg for money." Inside, a young employee began to head toward the door. But Elias had already stepped out from behind the counter. He walked to the door, opened it, and smiled gently. "Good morning, sir. Come on in. There's a seat by the fireplace waiting for you." The old man stammered, I don't have enough to pay for anything." Elias placed a calm hand on his shoulder, his voice warm and steady. "Sometimes people are invited here simply because they need a place to sit." Elias led the man to the quiet table, brought him a hot cup of coffee, a slice of banana bread, and a clean hand towel. No one stared at him like a beggar. No one pretended to be busy just to avoid him. A little later, the man pulled a crumpled letter from his shirt pocket. His voice trembled. "I used to be a chef, but I lost my job over a small mistake, and no one ever let me explain, until now. This is the first time anyone's told me I deserve to sit." That afternoon, Elias stepped behind the cafe. In his hands was a new wooden sign, hand-carved. He mounted it on the back door. the one he'd once been thrown out of without mercy. The sign read, "This door once closed on me. Today it opens for anyone who needs another chance." Late that evening, Elias sat with Jordan, Penny, and a few other staff. They ate a simple dinner at the bar, egg sandwiches and leftover orange juice. Jordan asked quietly, "Mr. Elias, when will you finally take a day off?" Elias smiled, eyes drifting toward the darkened street outside. "When I'm sure. No one here still feels forgotten." The next day, a letter arrived at the local newspaper. The message was short, just one paragraph. "I was once kicked out of a cafe just because I looked too tired. But this week I walked into Marigold Café, and the person serving me was the owner. He didn't ask if I could pay. He asked if I'd eaten. And because of that, I made it one more day." Signed, someone who was once forgotten. Elias didn't know who sent the letter, but that morning, as he unlocked the cafe and paused in front of the big window, he whispered to himself, "We can't save the whole world, but we can start, with a cup of coffee and a sincere hello." Elias Carter was once fired, simply for choosing to respect someone others ignored. He was once the young man labeled as too soft in a place that worshipped indifference. But it was that very kindness that became the key to a turning point no one saw coming. From a nameless waiter, Elias became the owner of a cafe. Not through wealth, but through the courage to live with integrity. He didn't take revenge through power. He changed an entire system by refusing to play by its rules. If you've ever been looked down on, ever been fired just for being yourself, share your story in the comments below. Your voice deserves to be heard. And don't forget to follow this channel, where the forgotten become the ones who rewrite the game.